My name is Judith. I was born in 1943, Budapest, Hungary. Actually, September 28th. My parents married a year before I was born. The date was in February 1942. My father was a silversmith and mother was a housewife. The truth is that those days a Jewish woman couldn't really work because there was a law. They called it numerus clausus, which meant that it was controlled how many percentage of Jews could work. She was out of the percentage. My father was taken to the labor camp, and if they, well behaved, the wife could go and visit between Christmas and New Year. It was well behaved, mother went to visit. I was born 9 months later. When my father, again, for good behavior, could go home to visit, to see the newborn child, that's when he saw me, and maybe a few more times. But since I was a baby, I really don't even remember that. Mother was taken away to the concentration camp when I was a year and about a week old. We lived in a safe house. They called them the Wallenberg houses. Raoul Wallenberg bought 32 apartment houses in Budapest, and we happened to live in one of them. Those houses had the Swedish flag, and they were untouchable because it was Swedish territory until 1944 September, October. So the SS officer and the Aero Cross officer were coming, and they said they have to take her to register at Margaret Bridge. So the SS comes, of course, looking at the birth certificate, I was more than a year old. So he wanted to walk out and leave her alone and me. The SS pulled him back. But no, more than a year. So they took her to register, and we didn't see her for 9 more months. We was in a concentration camp in Austria. The camp name was Lichtenberg. This was one of the smaller camps. There was no crematorium over there. So this is just about the beginning, how my life started. Just to say who was with me, my mother's parents were with me.
And they stayed in the
They stayed, they stayed with them because otherwise they would live in the ghetto. And since nobody wanted to go to the ghetto, they stayed with us. We lived in a so-called safe house or Wallenberg house. Raoul Wallenberg was a Swedish diplomat who was transferred to Hungary to be in the embassy. And when he saw the situation, he started to give out Swedish. First he bought the apartment houses, then he was giving out Swedish passports along with Swiss passport. They call them Schlusspass, I think. But after a while, they ran out of paper, this official paper, so some people just got like a piece of paper, like a half a page, and with the Swedish stamp and his signature and a number, and instead of the real thing. And that Swedish passport they were still giving out. I happened to have my mother's Swedish letter and Wallenberg paper. And with that, and living in this safe house, she was taken away. But really, if I would say a few words about Wallenberg, I would be an ungrateful human being, because I am here today because of him. If we didn't have the luck to live in that apartment house, my mother and my whole family was taken away long before. 1944 October was almost at the end. And I always say it was a miracle. Even though they took mother, she came back. Unfortunately, my father perished. But I owe my life to him. He was a student, I believe it was a University of Ohio, and he graduated. He was studying to an engineer. And just because of him being in the United States, the Russian thought that he was a spy. They really didn't talk about it. It was always unofficial. But he was meeting the Russians, that they have some meeting. They put him in a car, and that was the last he was seen. And where they were supposed to meet, he left his attaché case. And that was all left after him. But the truth, what happened, it did come out until many, many years later. It was even after he became an honorary United States citizen. It was, I can't think of the year fast enough. And President Obama signed it into law that he became an American citizen after he passed away. And the following year, it was 5 years ago, he became they awarded him the Congressional Gold Medal, highest honor somebody can get, not born American. And as luck has it, I was invited. The date was July 9, and the reason I remember so clear, it was our 36th wedding anniversary. And July 9 was the date when he set foot in Hungary in 1944. So there always have, these things has a meaning. And his whole family attended this ceremony. And of course, his older sister spoke. And he only had one wish. And I have to mention, I'm sure she was in her 90s. She spoke English beautifully, without any notes, anything. And he says, I only ask one request. I only have one wish. You are so powerful. Please, let me know what happened to my brother. It didn't come out. I'm not sure that she was still alive when a former high-ranking Russian officer died, and they opened his diary, and it said exactly what happened, what they did to him, which prison he died. For me, my hero.
When did you find out that you were, when did your family tell you?
actually, we never talked about it really, because it wasn't an issue that, safe house, that's it. And when I started to learn about history and Wallenberg and what happened, and I said to myself, oh my God, I'm here because of him. And then I started to get a little bit more involved. Every year we have Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Memorial Service in our shul. And I am very involved in it. And then when I find out about Wallenberg, and that was his centennial year, and it was, we talk about it here in the center, I said, I have to find out more. And then I find out somebody spoke in another Jewish center in Rigo Park. And I find out, and my friend says, we are going, why don't you come? You are from Hungary. And I went to listen to this man, and they introduced him, and his name sounded like the way I read it in the booklet. But when he got up the podium and he said his name, I says, oh my God. We had a smokehouse across the street where I lived in Budapest, same name. I find out that was the father. So I tried to get in touch with him. Rest is history. I asked if he would come and talk in our shul. And he was busy, he wasn't sure, but I had this dialogue for at least 6 or 7 months. Till the last minute he says, okay, I'm coming. And he was wonderful. I find out a lot more about Wallenberg. And from that point on, I was very devoted to follow up with this and speak about him whenever I can, because I want everybody to know what a hero he was. And when we went the next year to Washington, of course he was there, and I didn't realize at that point who he was. Kapor asked me, how could you get him to come to us? I was very relentless. And that's the truth. Every month a phone call, or a text, or an email. And he said, what you gonna do if it doesn't show up? I said, worst come to worst, I will speak. But I spoke 2 years later. That's about this. And going further with my story, my father didn't come back. My stepfather had 2 beautiful children and a wife who perished in Auschwitz. And somehow mutual friends, my mother met him. They started to write to each other, meet. They met February 28, and they were married in March 31st, the same year. And they were married for 42 years. He adopted me, because that was his wish when they got married. He's the only father I knew until I was 12 years old. And then when I find out that I had a father whom I didn't know, and of course I didn't welcome the news. I was very upset, rebellious, and it took me, I would say, 4 years. I was 12 years old. I was a teenager. You don't dump it on a teenager. No, he's not your father. And then when he started to talk to me about his family, and I got my father back in a way. And I tell you, I couldn't love him more if he would be my real father. He was the best human being you want to meet. He was very good to me, my mother, and my mother's parents. My grandmother called him only my little son. And when I speak, I always talk about him and about his two children, who was my half-sisters, whom I never met. And when he first saw me, I was told I looked exactly like his daughter in the age of 4, and that's when he met me. I have pictures of her and her brother and myself in that age, side by side. And whoever saw the pictures in the family first, he said, "Who is this beautiful little boy with Judy?" It wasn't Judy. It was Aniko, the daughter. And I feel very close in here, even I never met them in life. And when we were expecting my son, we were picking names, and I asked, "Would you mind if we call him Robert?" We did. And when we told my father, of course everything is through telephone and letters those days, that we have a little boy and we named him Robert. He couldn't talk, he started to cry. And he wrote a very beautiful letter. I still have it. I would like to thank you to give me my son. It's enough about me. I would like to talk a little bit, Mom. When she came back from the camp, she was, of course, skin and bone like Gabor's mom. Of course, she got typhus like everybody else there. When they came to the Danube, they usually come to the west side, which is Buda, and we lived in Pest, which is the east side. No bridges. All the bridges were bombed out. They had some makeshift, I couldn't even call bridges, or they were plank of wood. I mean, it was like very narrow, and that's how they have to come from one side or the other. And as far as when they were coming home on the way, all she asked every time for a glass of milk, and they wanted to give her food. Just milk, thank you. And people who were starved and have to eat solid food, they didn't last for a day after that. Because, as he said, they saved their life with the jello and the white bread. Her lifesaver was milk. Finally, she's coming through the makeshift bridge, and the closest relative was about 4 blocks from the bridge, and she hardly has any voice anymore, and she's calling out to the cousin. Her name was Maddie, and she didn't even hear her, and she didn't even look at her, and next door store said to her, as she says, "Maddie, somebody's calling your name." So she turns around, says, "I don't know her." So she finally gets close to her, and she says, my mother name is also Maggie. I am Maggie. Don't you know me? And then she realized that was my mother. Right away they ran to get my grandmother to see her, and then they got back to our house. It was quite a travel to go there. And then, of course, she met me. And of course, I didn't know her. Then they told me that it's not auntie, that's mommy. I said, okay, it's mommy. But she was skin and bone, even though she took off all her clothes and burned everything. The typhus is typhus. And it took years until she got back to herself. And she never wanted to talk about her experiences. And I wouldn't even know to ask anyway at the beginning. When I got older, even then she didn't want to talk. She just wanted to bury it. Most people did. Some felt they have to talk. Gabor couldn't talk till just a few years ago. He did, and we had a family occasion, and the first thing you talk about, where were you? Were you deported? Which camp? So my mother said Lichtenberg, and his cousin's wife says, oh, do you know Mrs. whoever? And my mother said yes. And of course she got white as a sheet. And then she started to speak this relative of ours, oh, she's such a wonderful person, and my mother just didn't react. And she said, how come you are not saying anything? You just shut down. And her answer was she was a capo. Didn't know. And the subject was closed. As it happens, I went to summer camp, and we have movies. And one evening the movie was The Capo. I have to see this. I have to see it, so I was curious. And that's it. And when I find out the meaning of the word, I was devastated. How can one Jewish woman can do this to the others? And of course, it was just a movie. It made in Hollywood. But I was devastated. And then I understand why mother didn't want to talk. I never went back to her to question because I knew how she felt.
You have so many experiences around you.
And it's like, my father who raised me never talked about it. His luck was that he knew how to drive a car. So of course he had to drive somebody. And he had connections. He could have helped his family if he would have been in town when they rounded them up. But he was driving ex-officer to the city that day. And by the time he got home, they were all gone.
So what do you want people who hear your story or watch this video to take away from the good that you've experienced, the joy of life afterwards, even though,
And I am the sort of lucky one, because most of this second generation, even though I count as first generation, they don't have grandparents. I did. A loving grandmother and a grandfather. Grandfather was doted on me, like his nickname was for me, and golden-haired princess, because I had blonde hair. But grandmother was my body. I could come to her, share everything with her, and it was buried. And grandmother was everybody's best friend, even the nieces and nephews, sister and brother children. Everybody loved her because her name was Jenny, not Aunt Jenny, and she was down to earth, and she was like one of them. And it trickled down to me also. So I was lucky. Because I had so much even after the war. Most people were the only one who survived. I had mommy coming back, loving stepfather, and I have Gabor, whom I met twice.
So do you have any last final thoughts about how can people remember that idea of never again for the Holocaust based on what you've said?
My final thoughts that we try to let everybody know what we went through, especially Gabor and his brother and mother and my mother. And sometimes you tell your story, and then somehow in today's world we talk about anti-Semitism, which is happening today. And then we remember very well what happened 1938 to the end of the World War II, in Hungary especially at 1956 when they have the revolution. Okay, but you are different. Nobody was different. I got my share what I got in my school. And you talk to people. Gabor talks here, we talk in Glenkov, another Jewish center. Sometimes people really do not get it. We try to talk, we pour our heart out, and you could see it's not easy. But some people just don't want to get it. And then we says, what's the use? So we want people to understand they have to listen what we're saying, because it happened then, it's starting to happen now, and people should be vigilant. It should never happen again.